Well, hello, students, and welcome to Psalms Anonymous. My name is Kyle Wisdom. I am the youth director at Lake Ridge Bible Church, and my favorite flavor of ice cream is cherry dark chocolate.
Hey y'all, I'm Josiah Presley from Galloway Avenue Baptist Church, and my favorite ice cream is cookies and cream.
What's up, guys? It's Mike Harper. I'm from the youth director at Hope Sunnyvale, and my favorite type of ice cream is chocolate chip cookie dough.
Are you one of those people that eats raw cookie dough, Mike?
Oh, yes.
Are you not one of those people, Kyle?
No.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. My favorite cookies are only half cooked. Like, it's the bomb.
I just figure salmonella is a real thing. Like, people, you can have them cooked. Like, you can cook them. It's an amazing invention we have now.
But it's great because, like, when you're making cookies, you get to have like one before you cook it, and it doesn't even feel like you had a cookie, so it doesn't count.
You didn't have a cookie.
Yeah,
you had some
cookie
raw
dough
mush that will become a cookie.
That's perfect.
So we are in Psalm 23:4 this morning. We've hit the midpoint of the psalm here. It takes a turn. According to the ESV, it says this: "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." I think this is a confusing verse for lots of people because just before in the psalm, he said that as a shepherd, he wants to lead us on right paths, to green pastures, to still waters. So why is it that now we're in a valley?
I think that's a good question. I think it's understandable that people are like question that. I think there are two main types of valleys we can tend to find ourselves in. And one of them is valleys we've put ourselves in through consequences of our own sinfulness, right? So now we feel like we're in this valley of the shadow of death, whatever. We're in this low point in life, and when we look back, we can kind of trace our actions into what has led us there, the consequences of our actions. And then I think there's also valleys we walk through because God has something in them to teach us, something in them for us. And it's not as much a negative as a learning opportunity.
Yeah. Well, and at least in this passage, it seems clear that the shepherd's not punishing the sheep. There's no hint of judgment on the part of, well, you silly sheep, you had it coming to you,
Right.
I think this is in some ways maybe focusing on, not exclusively, because I think it's keeping things broad, because it's poetry. It's meant to include lots of life experiences. But it's kind of presenting the inevitability of valleys. I think only sheep think that you can make it through life without going into a valley. I think shepherds are wise enough to know valleys are everywhere. We're going to have to hit one eventually. I think particularly for this shepherd, it kind of helps us with God's role in this to think of kind of the indirect and direct responsibility. So for people, we're not directly responsible for all our valleys. Some valleys just happen to us because we live in a sinful world. And sometimes God is only indirectly responsible for our valleys because we choose to go into them. And so he says, all right, I will let you go in. And so I think we need to be careful just going, this is God's fault or this is our fault. There's interplay going on there, I think.
Yeah, and I think, it's not as much a focus of, whose fault is it that I'm in this valley or whose fault, right? Because, kind of to the point you made earlier, Kyle, that like at some point we're all going to have to go through valleys, you know what I mean? And so we can't necessarily just go, okay, is it God's fault? Is it my fault or whatever, right? When we kind of talk about valleys, because everybody goes through valleys, right? Even the atheist who goes to a valley, and he's not going to be going, is it God's fault? Is it my fault? Right? Because he doesn't believe in God. Right? And so there's this reality that we're all are at some point going to go through valleys. And so then I think that kind of then pushes our focus to this comfort though. So when I am going through the valley, right, what makes the difference for me? What is it that gets me through the valley? And the psalmist, he brings out in the rest of that verse, right, about how he can go through these valleys because of the shepherd. And so I think there's kind of that reality, like, it's not always about trying to figure out, okay, whose fault is this? Or, why am I here? Or whatever. But it's, how are we going to make it through the valley? In this case, it's because of the shepherd, who is a good shepherd.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned that the next whole chunk of the verse is all about comfort. Once he gives us the situation of the valley, it's all comfort after that. And he mentions in particularly the desire of the sheep to not have fear. So even though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, he says, I will fear no evil. I think fear is a topic a lot of Christians deal with. I think in this season, a lot of people are having to deal with fear. How does fear affect our relationship with God? Do you guys think? Is there a good fear? Is there a bad fear? And what does it do to the way we relate to our shepherd? I think for me, that question is difficult because I think we dismiss fear sometimes as always bad. But like a really unafraid sheep can get itself in a lot of trouble if it doesn't realize it should be afraid. And so I think the question for me becomes a little bit more, what does your fear do to you? Because all of us will have those moments where something overwhelms us. We see it and we freak out. And so the question becomes, is my fear leading me away from the shepherd? And so I'm going to run off into a bush to hide, only to get eaten by wolves? Or is it leading towards my shepherd? Am I going to him and saying, listen, I'm afraid. I need your help. So I think that's where my question maybe gets a bit more complicated.
Yeah, and I think, we consider fear like, why do we fear something? Like we fear something out of like self-preservation, right? We fear what we think is a threat to like our, our safety, our livelihood, whatever it is, right? We have fear something because it's a threat to our preservation of self, right? And so then the question is like, where are we running in that? Because when we start to act out of fear, what are we trying to do? We're trying to self-preserve, whether that be, for the sheep running to the bushes or, trying to climb a tree or whatever, right? You think about it, that's silly, right? But, and the question is, where are you running then? Where is that self-preservation? And the idea here, I think, because he's been making it this whole time, that God is his preservation. And so where is it that he runs, or where is it that he is directed when he has fear? And that is to his shepherd, right? And so because of that, because he finds that protection, safety there, it's then, okay, I don't have to fear these other threats outside of me. I don't have to fear this valley or whatever, because I have my shepherd who is my preservation, right? It's a shift from not like trying to self-preserve, but rather recognizing I am preserved by my shepherd, right? And it's not just about me somehow being big enough and strong enough to take care of myself, right?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think when I think of fear, because it is so often in the Bible told do not fear, you shouldn't have fear, over and over, I think it's easy for us to say, anytime I'm ever afraid, like I'm a failure, right? But kind of like you said, Kyle, I think of fear almost like a fire alarm in a school, right? It's something to alert us and get us to make a decision. And there's two options. We're either going to trust the people in control who've told us when this happens, this is where you go, right? And I'm like you said, go closer to God, draw towards a shepherd, or we're gonna freak out and end up hurting ourselves more, right? I think you talked about running farther away, seeking protection in ourselves. I think one thing I can tend to do with fear is just remain completely immobile, right? It just stop in the moment and kind of like, I don't like this, and so I want it to go away. And what we do in either of those situations is limit God in our lives, right? We take the shepherd out of the equation either way, and we limit the impact he has planned for us because we're too afraid, right, to trust in him.
So as we look at the rest of the psalm, he says, I will not fear, for you are with me. So what is it about the shepherd's presence that makes David able to say, I have no reason to fear? What is it about God that allows him to say that?
I mean, he's God, right? It's this recognition that, like, who he is, his power, his authority, his goodness, right? Nothing can stand against him. Nothing has any, comes even close to his power and his authority over his creation. And so it is, if he is with me, or if I'm with him, right? It's like, what is there to fear, right? And I think if we want to take it even a step further to, like, for in light of Christ today, right? The ultimate equalizer for all humanity is death, right? You can't escape it. It's coming for us. We're all going to die. It's, and that's what drives us in fear. This fact that, like, I'm going to die. Like, we are always trying to, make it to where we're not going to die, right? Or whatever. And, in light of the gospel, it is Christ has beaten sin and death, right? He conquered the grave. He rose to show he's beaten death, and we beat death because of him. 1 Corinthians 15, right? And so that reality, like, there's so much security in that, right? Of being with the one who is stronger and has beaten all of our fears, I think, right?
Yeah, and just his constants, his desire to be with the sheep, the fact that he's come prepared. We see right after that he's got a rod and a staff. It's like, we're not afraid because he apparently knew these moments were coming. Yeah. And so we can rest in the fact that he's aware of the issue and he's ready for it.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's funny with the rod and the staff. He has a rod that is usually like the thing that he fends off, protects the sheep with, right? And so obviously that would be comforting. But he also has a staff, which is what he uses to guide the sheep, right? So he talks about both of them. So even in the valleys, even when it's hard to trust him, even we remember that he has something to protect us, and he has somewhere that we're going. And I think that's important when we are just tempted towards fears. Like, he still knows where we're going.
Yeah,
he's still guiding us.
Yeah, and I think all of us in life have gone through some valley like this, some dark valley filled with the shadow of death. And so the call of the Christian is, what did you see of God in that valley? I think of, in my life several years ago, we lost one of my cousins to suicide. And when you get that kind of news, and it was really surprising because he was doing so well in life. The last time I saw him, he was very successful. He was going to a really awesome school. He was very healthy. He's a Christian. And so his faith was leading his life. And so it was just very jarring to get this kind of news. And so for me, it was a wrestling of, how can something so bad happen so quickly and so completely, in the life of people I love. And it was the opposite lesson that I learned was, it was amazing how God could bring so much strength and so much comfort, even in something as dark and deep as that, and bring people through that in a way that still displayed his faithfulness. I think that was really powerful for me.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest, most impactful valleys I can remember walking through kind of happened right after high school for me. I was a pastor's kid growing up, right? Did nothing, like was straight laced student. And then I got a job, and my friends didn't come from church necessarily anymore. And so I, for a while, was just kind of following their lead, not really making a ton of decisions for myself, not really um, thinking through what is right, just kind of doing what I wanted. Um, and for a while, like, it was fulfilling. For a while, I was enjoying it. And then I started to see, not by my own understanding, because I wouldn't have come to this conclusion, but where it was leading in my life, where the end result of my actions were. And through that, God kind of got to me one day. It was like, hey, this isn't what we're going to be doing, right? This isn't the plan I have for your life. I have something better for you. And it was hard for me to see that at that time. It was hard for me to come out and then come to my parents and say, hey, for like the last 2 years, y'all don't really know all of this, but this is what I've been doing, and I don't want to anymore. It was scary. It was a fearful time to try to walk out of that and realize how far I had come from the path I was on before. But he was comforting in that moment, because I knew I was following God, and it made it okay.
Yeah, when I think about just kind of valleys, like in my own life, I think probably one of the ones that really has been one of the probably the deepest valleys for me. It's taken like the longest time for me to, I guess, walk through. Is like, so growing up having a deformed arm, I wasn't really bullied or anything like that, but I always thought I was less than other people. I had a huge inferiority complex. I thought I'd never go anywhere with my life. I thought my life was worthless. I thought my life was less than anybody else, just because I like had a deformed arm and other people had two arms. But that was a low place I walked through for a lot of my middle school and even into early high school years. And for me, what's kind of been the coming out of that valley was finding salvation in Jesus Christ and finding an identity in Christ, and how, who I am or what I look like or whatever it may be, it's really not as important because of Christ and because of the identity I have in him, and the fact that, the God of the universe loves me, even though I feel like I'm, inferior to everyone else. He loved me, died for the punishment of my sins. The fact that the God of the universe, he uses broken, crippled people all the time for his kingdom, and would want to use me as well. And so just finding my identity in that, and not in my physical appearance or my, what I perceive to be physical capabilities or whatever, just coming through that on the other end to find the faithfulness of God, who loves me, who has a purpose for me, who I have an identity in, that valley, to then find his love and to find his strength, in all the places where I am weakest. I think definitely, it's just to what you said and to what Kyle and to what you said, Mike, it's so crazy, I think, to look back and see just, I'd really say the amount of faithfulness you see in that God, to bring through that, and the amount of strength that you can find in him. So, yeah.
Well, John 10, verses 11 through 15 say this. Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. As we connect this chapter in John to this psalm, what can these valleys teach us about how Jesus is still the Good Shepherd?
I think the important thing to remember as we are walking through valleys is that there's nothing, like there's nowhere does it say that God had to walk through them with us, right? Kind of like you said, it's his goodwill. He is there with us, but he's God, right? He doesn't have to do anything. He could just leave us and be like, hey, I'll see you at the end. Y'all have fun, right? But he doesn't. He has chosen to walk through those situations with us, and he's the only one we should really want to walk through those situations with us, right? I think about wrestling because I used to love wrestling when I was growing up, right? And I would always talk with my buddies like, who's our dream matchups or whatever from people, and like God's like the Undertaker, like the 20-0, the not undefeated, no one's better kind of. That like that's who we have walking with us. And I think John does a good point of like pointing that out here. Is like, this is who you want with you right now.
Yeah, the reality that like he is our shepherd. He's not just, as chapter 10, John was saying, just a hired hand, somebody who's like, yeah, I'm gonna, I guess, be here and do this for a little bit, but then like the second it gets difficult, the second valley shows up, he's gone, right? But this is, he's a shepherd that stays with it, right? And it's so cool, I think, and we kind of go like, it's like, to what degree does he stay with it? To like, what measure do we recognize like his faithfulness as a shepherd to where we can trust in him and have no fear, and he says, in the passage you just read, Kyle, right, that the shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, right? And that reality that, Jesus, he has laid down his life for us. He literally has. 2,000 years ago on that cross, right? He laid down his life for us. And so it's like this idea, like we can trust in him, right? And so then we come through and we go to the valley of the shadow of death, right? And we're trusting in the one who, as Mike said, he's like the heavyweight champion of the world, right? He is like, no power, no authority stands against him, right? And yet he has walked with us, and he has proven his faithfulness to us, to love us by laying his life down for our benefit, for our good, right?
Yeah, and I think that last statement you made fits well with the idea that Jesus is pointing out is the difference between the hired hand and the shepherd is that the shepherd actually loves the sheep.
Yeah.
He actually cares for them. He is not going through this valley trying to make it hard on them.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the motivation that Jesus has as our good shepherd. He is motivated purely by love. And how can I, as their good shepherd, lead them well and protect them and provide for them, even in these darkest moments? And so I think that's a very comforting thought. So that's about all the time we have this morning. Thank you for joining us, everyone. That is Psalm 23:4.